Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Tales from the Darkness. Gather round and try to stay in the light. Some of the others from the dark aren't quite as civil as I am, and I hate cleaning up that mess. Did the Ouija work? From Kitty JJ. My friends and I decided to go on a cabin trip near Big Bear, California for 2 of our birthdays. It wasn't really much of a cabin, more of a house in a small neighborhood surrounded by the forest. There were 9 of us going, and we drove in 3 separate cars to accommodate everyone's schedule. The car I was riding in had 4 of us in it. When my car arrived, it was around 10 a.m. The sky was gray, and you could feel the moisture in the air. We each ran up the stairs with baggage, groceries, and my dog in hand. We proceeded to explore the cabin. It was Christia's first time going on a cabin trip. She can be a bit paranoid. I had begged her to come for years. She loves hearing true scary stories on YouTube. It didn't help that some of the recent ones she was hearing were about cabins in the woods and vacation horror stories. The only reason she agreed to come this time was because it was mine and Michelle's birthday. Christia walked around the cabin and made sure that all the windows and doors were locked. While she did that, Sammy, Jeffrey, and I began drinking. About 30 minutes later, car number 2 arrived. Michelle and her 2 friends Jenny and Ryan walked in. Prior to the trip, I would make jokes about Ryan conjuring demons in the cabin, and he'd jokingly agree. He's goth, a little dark, but overall he's pretty chill. They proceeded to explore the cabin themselves, each walking into different rooms. I was enjoying my drink when Ryan yells, "Hey, look at this!" We ran into the room he was in and found him in the walk-in closet. He was looking at old brooms, the type you see witches on. One of them had a weird face carved into the wooden part of it. We each had a laugh about the cabin owner possibly being a witch. We left him alone and went back into the kitchen to have a few more drinks, when I hear him say, "Look what I found." As I looked over, I see him walk out with a Ouija board. Of course, Ryan's goth ass happens to be the one to find a Ouija board, on Christia's first cabin trip. How fantastic. He said he found it at the top section of the closet. We all joked around about it and he put it back. At around 7 p.m., the 3rd car arrived, and Max and Angie walked in. By this time, it was dark and extremely foggy. I rushed the board over to Max to show him what we had found. I'd been on 3 cabin trips with him, and this was the first time we'd found something that strange. We both laughed about it, and again the board was put away. Michelle had gotten a bit drunk and accidentally broke 2 glasses, as well as popped the screen door off its sliding panel. We cut her off and put her in her room to sleep before anything else was broken. After a few drinks, Jeffrey brought the board back out. Max, Angie, Jeffrey, and Ryan began to use it. It moved here and there, but nothing too crazy. We each thought one of them must have been playing a prank and brushed it off. They said goodbye and put the board away again. It was about 12 a.m. Christia, Sammy, and I went upstairs to our room to get ready for bed. We didn't fall asleep, however. Maybe we were all a bit tense from witnessing them use the board. At about 3 a.m., we hear Jeffrey downstairs complaining about how we were all asleep and shotgunning beers by himself. Slowly but surely, Michelle, Angie, and Max went out to join him. The next morning, a Saturday, I woke up and got ready for the day. It was pouring outside, so we couldn't do much but stay in. I spoke with Jeffrey, and he had told me that the patio door kept opening and closing by itself during the night, which is why he was up at 3 a.m. Now, I know what you're thinking. It must have been the wind. But the patio door was a whole other room. 4 walls in all, no windows open, no way for a gust to come in and open or shut the door. I called Michelle over to speak to her about the broken glasses and screen door, and asked if she could please not break anything else. She didn't seem to care much about breaking them and said, "I'll pay for them." Later that night, after a few more drinks, Ryan brought the board out once more. Once again, Max, Ryan, Angie, and Jeffrey began to play. Sammy noped the hell out of the living room. She didn't want to be any part of it or witness it. Christia continuously told them not to be rude to it. Michelle and Jenny were in their room the whole time. They began to ask questions. Is someone here with us? The pointer moved to yes. What's your name? B-E-N. While it spelled out the name Ben, you could visibly see the shock on each of the players' faces. Ryan let go of the pointer and started calling for Jenny, while the rest were in awe of the movements. Angie asked, "Do you want to party with us, Ben?" No. At this point, Angie's tone got a bit sad, and she said, "Aw, I'm sorry, Ben. We'll leave you alone." And with that, the remaining player said goodbye, and the pointer moved to goodbye. Right after the game ended, Christia spoke up. "You guys, there was a murderer in the town by the name of Ben." Everyone was a bit shocked. The town we were in was very small. Its population was only 10,000, while our city is 340,000. I brushed it off and said, "It's too vague, it could be anyone. We can't really confirm that's who he spoke to." About half an hour later, Jeffrey grabs the board and begins to play by himself. He believed the others were playing a prank on him, moving the pointer themselves. So while he played, he spelled out some immature phrases, and kept saying the board was a joke. The next day was Sunday. Jeffrey began to drive us home, and at some point he must have blanked out on the freeway. I was typing up my apology to the cabin owner on my phone about the 2 broken glasses when I heard him say, "I'm sorry." I heard the brakes screeching and looked up to see us quickly approaching the stopped car ahead of us. I quickly grabbed the thick blanket on my lap and put a layer above my dog and curled my body over her. We swerved a bit, but luckily avoided the accident, and thankfully the car behind us stopped in time too. We arrived home safely, and that was the end of our trip. A few days after the trip, Max tells me Jeffrey has been having sleep paralysis, which he had never had before. He said whenever Jeffrey would try to sleep, he would see dark figures laughing at him. It had happened so often he was afraid to sleep. Max and I found it a bit funny. He was messing with the board, spelling out immature phrases, and now this is happening to him? I messaged Michelle and Christy in a group chat to let them know. Michelle's response got me a bit worried. She said she had also been having sleep paralysis. She's had it before, but it had gotten worse after the trip. She had also been witnessing figures laughing at her and having visions of bad things happening to her friends. I was a bit confused. She didn't play with the board during the trip. Why did her sleep paralysis suddenly get worse? I came to the conclusion of Jeffrey disrespecting the board, and this was his punishment. But Michelle disrespected the home Ben resides in by destroying its property, so she was punished as well. I'm not sure if the board really caused all this, but I do wish we found out more about Ben. All I know for sure, Jeffrey never wants to play it again. It pretended to be a cat. From Anonymous. There are very few encounters that left me terrified. I don't usually see anything, but I hear things. I hear what I think is my husband calling my name from the other room, only to find out that he never said anything. I hear something hit the garage, only to check and find nothing there. No animals or people even out of their houses, and nothing that could have fallen or knocked into the door. Last night, I was playing video games in the master bedroom. The master bathroom was right next to me, and I could see it out of the corner of my eye. Now, I have 4 cats. They like to make messes, noise, and knock things around. When I started hearing noise coming from the bathroom, I didn't think anything of it. It's just the cats being cats, on the sink worshipping the faucet gods and such. I was distracted, and as long as I didn't hear them make a mess, I wasn't going to get up. I paused my game for a moment because I got a notification on my phone. I stopped to look at it. That's when I noticed that all 4 of my cats were accounted for. I could see them from where I was sitting on the bed. 2 were on the bed with me, 1 was at the bedroom door, and 1 was between my bed and the master bathroom. That's when I heard it again. At first, I thought something had simply fallen. Not a big deal. My cat Luna was the one who was between me and the bathroom. She was watching something in there. That's when I heard the lid to the toilet move. The same noise it makes when a cat jumps onto the back of the toilet. I froze. I slowly reached for my phone and called my husband. He was in the living room. This might sound odd, but I didn't want to move. The cats like to follow me around the house, and I wanted my husband to see that they were all accounted for before I told him what happened. He was playing Halo Reach with his friends in the living room, and I asked him to come to the bedroom. He was hesitant because he was in a match, but I told him this was serious. When he got to the room, I explained what happened, trying not to cry. If I hadn't stopped for a minute to look at my phone, I never would have noticed that the ghost in our house was pulling something. I'm not sure why, but it made me more afraid. I know that this probably doesn't seem that scary or even that paranormal to some, but it terrifies me. There are a lot of noises that I dismiss because I think my cats are being weirdos, but now I'm wondering if it was actually the cats at all. Childhood Memory from Mr. Midnight 6. When I was 7, back in 1999, my family and I moved from California to Texas to avoid the rising levels of gang violence in my home city of Compton. Arriving in Irving, Texas, we moved in a home on a street called Shady Grove Road. Nothing peculiar about the location. In fact, I loved it there since there was a river behind our backyard and a local park named Fritz Park. It was a huge relief being able to go outside and play with the other children that lived next to my home without the sounds of gunshots being fired. One of the boys I met became my best friend and would tell me that the old farm that was in the field behind our houses was haunted. Our parents would joke around about being out too late, that the old man who lives in the abandoned barn will come out and kidnap us, then drag us to the river. Being scared to be out after sunset, we would obey our parents' requests and be in early. A year passed by in our new home without anything unusual happening until tragedy struck. A nice old man was walking to Fritz Park on a rainy day, and as the news stated, he wanted to get a better look at the overflowing river behind the park, but the dirt was not stable from the constant rain, and he fell 15 feet into the river and eventually drowned. His body was recovered 2 days later, a mile down the river. The next day, my friend came to visit me while I was in the garage helping my father with his jewelry business and asked me if I wanted to play by the river. Still shaken by the recent incident, I declined since I was scared to go down there. I would rather play by the barn instead, so he chose to do so. After an hour or so of playing near the barn and in the woods, curiosity got the best of my friend, and he started walking to the river. I followed after him, calling out his name, but he wouldn't respond. I began running towards him, and he stopped as he was looking at the tree line on the other side of the river. He turned around and said, "Did you see that?" Confused, I asked him what it was, but he just kept saying, "You didn't see it?" I told him to stop playing around because it wasn't funny anymore. It was getting creepy. All of a sudden, we heard a loud splash that scared both of us, and we ran as fast as we could back to my dad's garage, where he came out asking what the problem was, and we explained what happened. Taking a sip from his beer and grabbing his cane, he walked towards us and said, "The old man in the barn gave you a warning," and laughed. Patting me on my head, my father, still laughing, told us we needed to be careful near the river and no such thing as the paranormal exists. Shrugging it off, we walked back outside, and my friend told me what he saw near the river, explaining that it looked like there was someone or something in white walking along the tree line, peeking out behind a tree. As he was trying to make sense of what he had seen and being in shock, he was having a hard time explaining. After he finished, he told me he should head home. He was exhausted and said it looked like a thunderstorm was blowing in and had to go. As he was leaving, my father called me in and told me to help him with polishing a couple of rings for him, so I agreed to do so because I didn't want to go to bed yet. Once I was finished, the thunderstorm was in full swing. The rain was pouring down in buckets, the lightning filled the night sky, and thunder was very loud. My father, not wanting me to stay up any longer, told me to go to the house since it was already 10 p.m. and the weather was bad, so I agreed and said goodnight as I opened the door of the garage, getting the courage to run the few feet back to the house door. Going against my father's orders to go to bed, I decided to stay up and play my Nintendo 64 until I fell asleep. When I woke up and checked the time, it was 3 a.m. I could still hear the Kokory Forest theme song while I got up to get a drink of water. I grabbed a chair and used it to get up to the sink and looked out of the window, and I saw the door to the garage open. Since the rain stopped, I decided to go check on my father. I walked outside and to the garage door in the chilly night. I peeked inside and saw my father asleep on his desk, using his arms as pillows with his face down. I noticed he was soaking wet, and I put my blanket on him, being too lazy to wake my mother up and asking her to help me bring him inside. I just closed the door so the cold wind wouldn't bother him. Heading back inside and finally getting a drink of water, I sat on the chair for a bit, thinking of what my friend said he saw and eventually laughing about it. Getting back up to put my cup in the sink, I looked out the window and saw the garage door was open again. I was frustrated, knowing I had closed the door completely. There was no way it could have opened with just the wind, so I headed back outside to close the door, but to my surprise saw my dad was not there, only my blanket that was on his chair. Confused and fully awake at that point, I called out to my father and got no response. Looking down at his desk, I saw there was water dripping down from his bench and chair where my father was asleep. As I looked around, the lights started flickering on and off. Freaked out, I ran outside, and to my surprise, I saw a white figure walking in the field by the old barn and going into the woods. Being in complete terror, I ran back inside the house and barged straight into my parents' room screaming. My parents woke up quickly and turned on the lights. I saw my father was in bed, telling me to calm down, while my mother held me, rocking me back and forth and telling me the same. Once I was stable enough to talk, I asked my dad what time he came back inside from the garage. And with a confused look on his face, he replied, "I came in right after you left. I just cleaned up and locked the garage door. I didn't feel like drinking anymore, so I decided to go to sleep. Why?" Hearing that, I began to cry and told him everything that happened. My father was alerted immediately and jumped up out of bed and grabbed his jacket and a baseball bat, thinking someone might have broken in. Running outside into the garage, I watched from the kitchen window as my dad was jiggling the garage door, unable to open it. My mother was next to me, asking if I had been dreaming. I told her I was not making this up. It had been open when I woke up. Angry, I ran to my room, grabbed my jacket, and went outside to my father. He was waiting there and told me there was no way anyone could get in since the door was locked. I told him to open the door, and he did so gladly. Upon opening the door and turning on the lights, I could see what was inside, and in horror, I ran to the back door of the house, screaming, "I told you I'm not dreaming." My mother started questioning me, asking me what it was, but I was paralyzed by fear and unable to speak. My mother went out and had a look for herself. I got up on the chair by the kitchen window again. I could see my dad scratching his head and a surprised look on my mother's face as she looked around, scared to go into the garage. My father went inside and looked around, coming back out with my wet blanket. Locking the garage door and coming back into the kitchen with my mother, my dad asked me how the blanket got in the garage and why it was wet. I explained again what happened. My father interrupted me, telling me to go to bed and they will deal with this. Walking to my room, I closed my door enough to leave a crack and hear what my parents were talking about. My mother asked how it was possible that I was able to get into the garage while it was locked, and who did I see on the table? My father replied, "I don't know. I'm as confused as you are. It's just crazy to see the wet footprints walking in the garage and to the back wall where the footprints stop. And how did our son's blanket get in there? I don't remember seeing it when I left, and I wasn't even drunk." My mother asked, "You don't think this house is haunted, right?" My father replied, "I don't know. I just don't know." We moved out 2 weeks later. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, don't forget to hit the like button, and subscribe if you want to hear more. If you would like to have your story narrated, you can send it to storiesofdarkness55@gmail.com. And as always, pleasant dreams.